This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, as we were talking about before the show, this is a union selection, a union member selection right here. The seventh, lucky number 7 for this particular union member. I'm going to give you the albums that have been selected previously, and you try to find the common link between these records. You ready?
Okay, hit me.
Okay. Guar, Scumdogs of the Universe.
Okay.
Material Issue, International Pop Overthrow. What's the any connection?
Wait, I'm lost.
They both have guitars. Eels, Electro Shock Blues.
They're all humans?
Yes. True. Tom Waits, Bone Machine. I don't know that Tom Waits is actually a human being. I think he might be an alien. I'm pretty sure there might not be a guitar on that record. There's clanging of things, but I don't. There's
intelligence from the same universe.
Yes. Antenna's Hideout and Moving Targets Fall.
Wow.
So the only thing that is that they were all released on a compact disc at some point. That's the only thing I can think that can, because they don't even share the same letters. Like there's no A in Eels, and there's no E in Tom Waits. There's no E in Guar. Like there's nothing that connects these bands, and yet they all come from the same person. Welcome back to the show, Andrew O'Connell, Andrew OC. Welcome back, Andrew. Tell us what combines, what makes all these records under your portfolio happen together.
Well, good to see you guys. Thanks for having me back. They are all somewhere in this crazy little brain that I've heard with these crazy little ears. I think reference Guar is human, and I think I'd like to throw a red flag on that one. I definitely think they're from somewhere else.
That's true. They are from a different. Gosh, I mean, I couldn't even get 2 on here. We already blew it up.
That's wild. So, for this record, what alien species are you bringing to us for this episode? Who'd you pick?
The alien species, I believe they're from Chapel Hill. I'm really happy to bring this because I think I forget when I really started, but one of the earlier picks, I kind of wanted to bring this out, but DMO is still very much kind of not repeating bands for the longest. So I'd like to bring back to DMO Superchunk and their 1994 album Foolish, which turned 30 just a couple days ago. I want to say like within the last week, turned 30.
Look at that timing. Amazing. That's like
you
perfect.
Guys did wonderful. You planned it perfectly.
Yes, we did. We put so much planning into this, like we always do in terms of anniversaries and celebrating milestones. But yeah, we talked about Superchunk, Jay, on episode 84 in season 2. No Pocky for Kitty. That was August of 2012. We were so young and full of life, and the world was still possible. Aliens hadn't invaded us yet. And
was that one of our first episodes with a guest? I think it might have been.
It was. It probably was. Kim Ware from This Is the Sound. I don't know if she does that anymore, but she joined us to talk about that. I believe she was from the area and she had some stories to tell. But yeah, it's been a long time. And now I have reached out, and I don't know if we'll ever get to talk to Mac, but I have reached out over the years to see if Mac or Laura or somebody would like to come on to the podcast and chat. But they got stuff going on. They're always like doing things.
They're busy.
So they're busy, and they run a whole label too. It's not like they're just playing in a band, then going home after they run Merge Records. So Andrew, is this a record that you got when it came out, or did you come to this later? What's your history with Foolish?
So Superchunk in general has been a kind of periphery band for a long time for me. I definitely had, I remember friend's older brother burned a CD for me in the 90s. It wasn't Foolish. I want to say, I'm not going to commit to that. I had burned CDs. I had some Napster LimeWire files where I knew a lot of songs. But I really got really far into Superchunk like 2018, I want to say, when they put out their record, What a Time to Be Alive. I just played the hell out of that. And then I went back to so many of these records that, I had given some spins, in the maybe late 90s, early 2000s, like my college years. I had them where I knew songs, but I didn't necessarily know the whole record. This is one that kind of jumps out at me. So,
well, a little bit of history on this particular record. We already did the history of the band in our I think I'm assuming we were doing history of the bands at that point. I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure we were. So Foolish came out in April, as mentioned, April 19th of 1994. It was produced by Brian Paulson, who was a name that I always associate with like the alt country of the 90s because he worked on Sunvolt Records and Uncle Tupelo, and Wilco. I mean, he worked with all the big, all country bands. And they recorded at Pachyderm Studios, and then they mixed it with Paulson at Steve Albini's house, because I don't think Steve Albini had a dedicated studio maybe at that point. I don't know, or maybe he had a studio and then also a home studio, but they mixed it as home. And the was released on Merge Records, which of course it was, because that's their label. That that makes the most sense. This is their fourth album following On the Mouth, and then they released after this a collection of B-sides called Incidental Music 1991 to 1995. They have been, you mentioned, they just put out a record not too long ago, and they've been a fairly especially in the 90s, they were prolific. Like almost every year in the 90s they had a record out. In the 2000s started to slow down a little bit. Here's to Shutting Up came out in 2001, and then there was a 9-year break between that and Majesty Shredding, which is a hard thing to say, which I really like that record a lot. I haven't spent a lot of time with all the albums, but I've listened to them all, and that record, it sounds really good. And then they had I Hate Music in 2013, What a Time to Be Alive in 2018, and Wild Loneliness in 2022. And then besides that, Mac McCaughan, who's the lead singer and guitar player, is also in a band called Portastatic, and he's also released solo albums. And then John Wurster, who is the current drummer, I don't think he was the original drummer, but he's the current drummer. And is he still with Superchunk, or did he retire?
I think he recently parted ways.
He's also in the Mountain Goats and with Bob Mould's band. So they just announced they're doing a tour, and our friend Chip Midnight had tweeted at them about coming to Columbus as a part of their Foolish 30th anniversary tour. And gosh darn it, they're coming to Columbus in October for the 30th anniversary tour. So Chip is beyond excited. I'm excited too, except it's on a Monday, and I don't really go out during the week. So maybe they'll live stream it for me. I don't know. Maybe Chip can just hold up his phone while we FaceTime and I can see the show. I don't know what I'm going to do there. I'm going to have a very strong cup of coffee if I'm going to go to that show, because I usually am in bed by like 9:30. So, and I'm guessing they're not going to be done by 9:30. We'll see. Jay, obviously we've done a Superchunk record before. Are you familiar with the whole catalog? Have you heard this record before?
I feel like my story's similar to Andrew's. I got into the band. I mean, I was aware of the band for a long time. I didn't really get into them until Majesty's Shredding. I like that album. I Hate Music a lot. I like What a Time to Be Alive. I liked Wild Loneliness. So I'm more of a fan of the more recent stuff released since 2010 in terms of owning the albums and listening to them a ton.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, I heard No Pocket for Kitty. I think I've sampled some stuff here and there, but they're just one of those bands that I like everything I hear, but for whatever reason, I don't think to go back and dig into their catalog. And I don't know why that is. It just doesn't seem to happen. So thank you for giving me the excuse to go back and listen to a record I hadn't listened to.
I'm exactly the same way because I know songs like Here's Where the String Come In. I've listened to that record. I like a lot of the songs on there, but they're for some reason they're not a band that's on the top of mind when it comes to what do I want to listen to, what do I want to throw into a mix. And that's probably something I think also because they've had a lot of like evolution. Like No Pocky for Kitty is a pretty rough sounding record in some respects, and they've kind of refined. Oh, bits and pieces have been refined over and over and over again. For when you get into like the 2000s, those are very clean sounding records. They almost sound like a different band in some ways.
I I have to admit something else that probably stops me from or doesn't encourage me to listen to their back catalog. Their album covers are polarizing. I think the newer ones are better, but the ones from the 90s are I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what to make of like I don't know what I'm going to hear when I look at some of these covers. Let's just put it that way. And I can imagine like pulling this catalog up and not knowing even know where to start just from a visual standpoint.
I hear you. That makes sense. Some of the album covers are a little rough.
Like this album cover, like looking at that, like, what is this going to be? This could be like the weirdest acid metal band ever, or it could be indie rock, it could be folk. I don't know.
Right. I'm really concerned what's hanging behind her.
Right.
Like there's a
It's a
chunk
little,
of meat hanging there. I'm not sure how many legs it has. I'm
I
a
think it's
little
a rabbit.
concerned. Is
I
it
think
a
it's a
rabbit?
Rabbit.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to like position my head so it looks like a rabbit. I'm not sure where the tail is and where the ears are. And
It's
okay,
being
I'll
hung
take
by
your
its back legs.
it's hanging by its
Is
back
that
leg. So those things dangling on the left are its ears, is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so is its tail cut off? What's that round spot?
The tail is like flopped back. So the white part on the upper left is the tail.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's still disturbing though. Why is there a dead rabbit hanging behind her? Did she do
We,
it?
I don't know. This is what I'm saying.
What's her face saying?
Her
I
face
don't.
says, I'm gonna kill you too if you don't like this record. You see, this guy, he used to write for the Village Voice, and now this is what he looks like because he didn't like
Well,
the
actually,
record.
I'll say the back the back of the record actually looks a whole lot more like you kind of know what you're getting out of this
Yeah.
than the front.
So we
But
did get some comments over at our Patreon. I'm going to share them now with you. Chip Midnight, who I previously mentioned, 100% worthy album, one of the best indie rock albums of the 90s, and it brings back so many nostalgic memories. It had come out almost 30 years to the date of this post. Hopefully that means 30th anniversary front to back Foolish tour. Boom. Loaded. Right
There
there.
it is. Chip asks and Superchunk delivers.
We need to get some more stuff asked for by him if that's the power that he wields. I'm just saying. Willie Dillon said, this is a classic. What else is there to say? Mike Bond, does indie alt rock get any better than this? Now, here's the one you've all been waiting for. Ian McIver said, I thought the album was all right. There were some tracks I enjoyed and others I did not. That's probably the best review of an album I've ever heard. There's some tracks I enjoyed and others I did not. I just want there to be a music reviewer that's what he writes every week. Like there's no change. He goes, there's some tracks I like and some that I didn't like, and then he gets paid for that. He said, I did find it a bit thin sounding at points, though it might be just the fact that it's indie rock and not really my wheelhouse. A better EP from a single listen. So to me, we should just end here because Ian gave you a better EP, and I don't think that we're going to do any better than that. I mean, that's high praise from Ian. But we're going to continue on. We'll share the poll results at the end of the show. But I'd like to go to you, Jay, now and ask, what's one thing that worked for you on Superchunk's 1993 album Foolish? Excuse me, 1994.
This is a band that's always worked. Their sounds always worked for me. And I've just experienced it in the past, like I would normally listen to music, right? You just like you're into it and you don't overthink it. So this was a chance to break it down and try to really pull apart like what about this is working for me. So I think what I came to is that particularly on this record, but in most of the stuff I've heard from them, is that they're able to kind of conjure these classic rocky kind of riffs, these, kind of muscular melodic guitar parts, but they deliver it with this immediacy and lack of polish. It's sort of filtered through this feeling of being in the moment, being a little loose. It feels vital and real. It doesn't feel over polished or overly like, I mean, it's crafted, but it's not like overly precise or precious. And there's something about that living in that middle space that I think creates some of the magic that's going on here. To kind of break down further, the guitar parts and the bass parts are these mix of like melodic guitar lines. A good example would be like the first part, Water Wings, but then they intersperse that with these chunky power chords. I think Driveway to Driveway is a good example of that. It's almost like that switch to the heavier guitar part is almost a hook into itself. Kicked In is another good example, where those guitars kind of get big and beady. Revelations is another good example. It's got a big chunky guitar part in it. And then on top of that, they got a singer whose voice it's in a higher register, which is not that's more of a classic rock kind of concept, right? You get a singer who can sing above the guitars, so it cuts through. Now, obviously, he's not doing like Robert Plant singing here, but just from a frequency standpoint, that's something that always stood out to me as well. So that these melodic lines that he can sing and deliver, they just intertwine with those guitar parts in a really interesting way. They can kind of fit in with them, but then they can also pop out and be doubled or add a harmony and really kind of take on this whole other, sort of next levels, deliver a chorus or deliver a big hook. The other thing I sort of noticed about all those three things working together, is they do a lot of this really cool intertwining of these melody lines that kind of crisscross, and they're just on the edge of like almost creating dissonance, but not quite, not to the point of it being distracting, just enough to have a little bit of tension in there. And I think there's just something with our brains when, at least my brain, when music does that, like then my brain makes the connections and fills in the gaps and like does a little bit of work, which I think is a good thing. And it sort of, that's maybe where the magic happens of like why something is sounds good to you or doesn't, or at least to me, is because my brain is actually participating in like, oh, that note and that note are sort of like close, but then this one's a little different, and then they moved on. And stretched out is a good example on this record where there's these three parts and they're kind of similar, but one of them's played twice the speed as the other one is. And they're sort of pushing and pulling each other, but not in a way that's overly sort of taxing on your brain to have to, it's not like prog or something where you're like processing like what's going on and getting wrapped up in that. It's just enough of a tension that overtones are created, between these guitar lines and the distortion being used and the tones that they're using. You're like hearing notes and layers and things that only happen because of the crisscrossing of the three instruments and the vocal. So I just kind of breaking it down, I realized a lot of that was going on. And I think that it almost it adds to that comment I was making about it not being like polish. Those are types of things like if it's overproduced, you kind of lose. But if you're in the moment, you get those little moments of magic happen. And I think this band, especially on this record, you can kind of hear those going on with the way that the different instruments and the songs are interacting with each other. So that's some of the stuff that I liked about it. How about you, Tim?
Well, the thing that I focused in on was the two guitar attack between Mac and Jim Wilbur. And like you said, like it gets right on that edge of doing something too noisy where it would become overwhelming. They always find these like just right parts to keep it. It's such an interesting combination because a lot of these songs are loud and fast, but they're able to not sound heavy. There's just this, I don't know if probably because of the way that they have the guitars, um, in terms of how much mid-range and how much high frequency there is, that there's some pretty like big riffs on some of these songs, but they don't sound like hard rock or metal. Like there's just this lightness to it. And I like that they're a little unpolished. They're a little bit crunchy. There's a little extra distortion happening here in places. It sounds like it just sounds, there's a rawness, even though I know that they recorded in the studio with a good producer and all that kind of stuff. There's still a raw aspect to this band that sounds real, of the moment and vital, that I find enjoyable from really the opening track to the end. Like they just keep this energy, and a lot of it is the back and forth, the two guitars when they lock in or when they're doing different things. um I don't think I ever, like I said, I don't think I've spent a ton of time with this band. I've really just gone through singles. So like Driveway to Driveway, I knew that song front to back. I don't know who introduced it to me. I want to say it was like Neil Schmidt, because he was a big Superchunk fan and would play them when we were recording records at his studio. And that's just, it's like such a cool little guitar riff, that darn 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 darn. Like there's just little bits like that where you just come up with little guitar hooks or little guitar riffs that are, if another band might turn them into an entire like big bloated thing, but these all sound, I don't small's not the right word, but it sounds authentic is the only way that I can put it. There doesn't feel like there's any sort of pretentiousness or what have you. It just sounds like a bunch of people in a room rocking out, and it's a little bit noisy when it gets loud. And I really enjoy that aspect of it, that it sounds live, and it has this great balance, because you mentioned about Mac's voice. He has that high voice, so it's kind of like sweet in that way, but his lyrics are not. Like, this is a dark album when you actually get into the lyrics, because I guess this is after him and Laura broke up, and then they make this record, then they got to go tour right after they've broken up as a couple. So it's almost like their Fleetwood Mac album, like Rumors, in that sense. So there's a little bit of edge to his voice in some of the songs because of that. Driveway to Driveway is a perfect example. Like, there's some dark songs lyrically, but his voice is always it's a strange voice in that we think of a lot of 90s singers as having like the Kurt and like rasp and whine, or the Eddie Vedder, Jarl, whereas he, like you said, like, this is a much different voice, and he gets out like real emotion on it. It's not emo, but there is some pain in his voice. You can hear it in some of the lyrics, and it doesn't sound overly fussed over. It just sounds raw. And I've heard that they're a great live band, which is why I'm like really struggling with, I want to go see them. Even though I'm old, I'll be 50 at that point. I don't know if I could stand in Scully's at 11
They
o'clock
won't
at
let you
night.
in, man.
They might. Well, I get an ARP discount at that point, just
True.
So I flash my card, and they're like, "Oh, get him to the seated section over there where the old people sit." It's nice to be able to go back to a band where I'm like semi familiar with them, but I haven't really spent a lot of time with the whole record, and get to actually spend time going through all the songs and listening to an entire album from front to back. And they changed a lot. They always had a different producer. Like, the previous record, On the Mouth, was produced by John Reese of Rocket from the Crypt, and that was for Matador. This is really their first record for Merge, and I think they did the very first record with Steve Albini, or not the first. No Pocket for Kitty was with Steve Albini, and then this one's with Brian Paulson. So they're always kind of like evolving the sound. Here's where the strings came in. They did that at Fort Apache, which is that one up in Boston area, where all the Boston bands recorded there. So each record is kind of its own thing with them. They take different approaches and they try different things. And whatever the decisions on this one seem like to me like some of the best decisions that they made. So
yeah, I think I agree with the sentiment around. There's something about this that feels very like honest and straightforward. It doesn't sound like I don't want to say they're not taking themselves too seriously. It's not pretentious. It's just like, hey, this is what we're doing. And I think that's what maybe one of the things that's for me at odds with some of the album covers. Because I see some of the album covers, I'm like, ooh, this is making like some kind of strange artistic statement that I'm like, seems like it might be heavy or super important. But when you listen to the records, it's like, oh no, this is really like accessible and easy to understand and like honest and straightforward.
yeah, I think Laura actually painted the cover, if I'm not mistaken. Andrew, you brought this record to us. What works for you on this record?
Well, I'll start by saying great job, guys, because everything you said I kind of had written down. But you mentioned, kind of a rougher recording, and it's not really, refined or polished, but you get that feeling like I have no reason to believe that they actually performed or recorded this live. But like you feel like you're in the room, the drummers to your left, Max on the other side. You just feel like you're part of this album. And or especially like so many of the DMO members are like, a lot of us have been in bands. So like we know what that experience is kind of like. And if I can highlight like that outro to Why Do You Have to Put a Date on Everything, where I'm going to assume it's Mac on the guitar. And it's just the kind of playing around on guitar noodling, and the drummer's just still going on the outro. And it just gives me the vibes of like, when not every band member is at practice and you're still trying to figure out it's just the guitarist and the drummer because the bassist couldn't make it, or you broke up with the bassist or something. So you're just really feeling like you're part of that that experience. You know, I think especially the albums that were before this, Superchunk probably really lives in that kind of more punk rock vein. And I think I like this one because they really gave themselves the opportunity to branch out a whole lot more. And not to say that there's anything wrong with their punker songs, you know, from Slack Motherfucker, a couple albums prior to even, you know, Without Blinking is a kind of a punkier one. And there's a couple more on here that still are very much in the rock punk-ish vein. But they kept this real sense of, like, I think to me it was a sense of urgency in so many of these songs. But then they knew how to let some of these just pause and like let the songs breathe. And like every time that we have a podcast, Kitty James Dio has made an appearance, and I need to put him in another. Sorry.
Go ahead. Well, while he's taking care of Kitty James Dio, I want to mention the video for Driveway to Driveway was directed in part. Also, the first part was directed. The directing team was Phil Morrison and Peyton Reed. If you don't know who Peyton Reed is, Peyton Reed just directed the like first two Ant-Man films.
Really?
He went from being a video director of local, you know, Carolina Chapel Hill indie rock bands to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is wild.
Got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Please continue, Andrew, if Ronnie or Kitty James Dio did not derail you.
Kitty James Dio's back upstairs.
Okay.
But yeah, you know, I think you were talking about Driveway to Driveway, which I think that's probably the most popular song on the album. Maybe it got some radio play. I'm not really sure. It didn't, not to my knowledge, in Chicago '94. But
right,
you know, Driveway to Driveway gives me this real like semi-charmed light type vibe, where like, you know, it sounds really happy, upbeat, but it gets really dark if you're paying attention to the song, where it's a song about driving drunk and getting your ass kicked. So I mean, just those kind of parallels kind of are meaningful to me. And another thing that really stands out to me in over the course of this album is that they really, there's several of these where, you know, at least four, they have some powerful outros. You know, the song is wrapping up, and like the first part, there's, you know, that outro might be, you know, I don't know if it's a minute and a half or 2 minutes, but in between the octaves playing off each other, and then just the guitars going all Pete Townsend at the end, you know, that's awesome. I talked a little bit about why do you have to put a date on everything. I think that outro is really cool. Driveway to Driveway also, like, I think the best part of that is when you hear them stomp on that stomp box, you hear that really happy riff, but it goes just dirtier, right? And you know, so by day, I'm a high school teacher. And so today I went to one of the students, and I'm just like, okay, you always wear rock and roll t-shirts and whatnot. I'm like, tell me what you think about this one. And I told him I didn't really think that it was going to be up their alley, because I didn't know. But I played Kicked In, because I think that it's just that it's kind of a slow burner with a real epic, like chaotic outro ending to it. And I, on a little post-it note, I got like, that was awesome. And no, I do listen to a lot of indie rock, and that was a good little experience for me.
Nice.
Yeah, right? I mean, the t-shirts are usually like Korn or Cannibal Corpse or something, but when I'm like, here's Superchunk, try this.
My wife has a kid who wears a Slipknot t-shirt, and he's like in 4th grade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, all of the rock and roll t-shirts are sold at Target and Walmart now.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't really mean, but I do agree with you about the outros. Like the outro to Saving My Ticket is really, really explosive. And they do have, it's just not always, let's repeat the chorus 2 times at the end and then, let it ring out. Like they do come up with interesting ways to end the songs. And all these songs are basically around the same length. They're all in like I think Without Blinking is the only one that's kind of shorter. Everything else is like 3.5 to 4.5 minutes, which is like a good spot for them because it allows you to get, those little interesting outros sometimes, or there might be a little bit of a guitar interplay at the beginning on like a fool that opens the record. You get like little bits of, you get breathing room in these songs where they can just rock out for like 2 measures or 4 measures, and it doesn't have to be, you're not going to get like crazy solos, but you're going to get the 2 guitars banging off of each other for a couple measures and doing some fun things.
Not that they can't solo, because I mean, look at so many other records, they can play, but
yeah.
Especially this record is where they let it breathe a little bit, and there's whether it's Like a Fool or Revelations, and like there's some slow burners on here that really build.
Jay, is there anything that doesn't work for you on the record?
Some of the slow burners are better than others for me. Like a Fool, it's a little plotting. I think Kicked In is a better example of them playing at that tempo, and it works a lot better. Keeping Track is another one. The album ender isn't great. It's kind of experimental. His voice, I think, would be the only other thing I would call out. Is just there's times when I love it, and it's brilliant, and there's other times where he's just pushing a little further than where it's comfortable in a way it just gets thin.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really helps when he doubles or they do a harmony in those moments. But there's a couple where he doesn't do that. It's just him by himself, and it's just a little thin and a little tough. And also just he's also doing like some of the verses in a lower tone, and then he moves to the higher tone, which I think generally works, but I'm noticing when, at least on this record, in the lower register, he's getting lost in the guitar sometimes, which I don't think happens as much on the later records. Like they sort of figure that out. I don't know if it's a production thing or a songwriting thing, but I definitely noticed it on this record where he's struggling a little bit to get out of the guitar's way. and I'm not sure if it's just like a melody thing or if it's a scene style thing or mix thing. And then all of a sudden he'll bust out, in the pre-chorus or the chorus, and you're like, okay, there it is. But for the first couple of lines, like I was lost in where was the vocal, what was going on there.
I
So
noticed that too.
yeah, some nitpicky stuff there for me. Anything else from you?
I agree with you. I don't like a Fool as the opener. I wish they opened with like Saving My Ticket, something like that, where you get the energy immediately. Because there's a lot of energy to this record, and
Yep.
that to me is a opener that does not tell you what this record's going to be. Like you can listen to that, you go, is this like a slowcore record? Like what's going on here? Or Water Wings or something just like to punch you in the face right out of the gate that would give you some energy. I did have the same issue with Mac's vocal. Like it would just get lost at times when he was singing lower. And I just prefer him in the higher register, and when he's doubled, it sounds awesome. And again, like you said, when I listen to the 2000s album, it is not an issue at all. Like they found the right mix. They found a way to make it present for the whole time. And I don't know if that's just because they had more time. They're not worrying about this is the 90s. They're trying to make a record, get out and tour again, get out and tour. Now they're managing a record label. Like I don't know how much time they're actually spending worrying about getting a perfect mix. I don't feel like that's the indie aesthetic of the 90s. It's like, well, we got to make sure the vocal is perfect the whole time. Like no, you can kind of lose the vocal a little bit and it's okay. That's part of the deal. But really just the intro, the first song to start the record, I would just move that around. I mean, I think I agree with you. I don't really like the closer in A Stage Whisper. It just kind of ends the record on a weird note, whereas I feel like everything's fairly straightforward, and then you get to that song, you're like, man, what's going on with this one? That could have just been the B-side for one of these songs. It is, and it's a 50-minute record too, so could have easily lopped that off.
They're the kind of band where you should, at the end, based on what the core of this band is and what they do really well, when you get to the end of one of the records, you should be ready to go again. You should be like, let's go again. And I think the way this record starts and the way it ends is so outside of what the band is about that I found myself like not necessarily being like, okay, let's run it back, because like I love that energy. It's punchy. I'm going to be in and out. I know where all the hooks are. With these bookends on this album, it wasn't as clear to me. It was like, oh, how does this record end? What's going on there? Is this still Superchunk? Like what? So
yeah,
I think those two tracks in particular are odd choices.
Yeah, that closing song, like it's either sounds like a early Built to Spill song, like we're talking There's Nothing Wrong with Love, or it sounds like Brian Paulson worked with Slint. He produced Spiderland. So I was like, oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's their Slint song, but it does not work for me in the way that the rest of the record does. Because it's really like nothing I want to get rid of other than that closing track, and then just move things around a little bit. That's it. Like this, it's a fun listen when they just kind of are rocking out and unleashing the energy. As a bass player, I wish the bass was a little bit higher. It can be thin at times. I think the MP3s I have are the original one probably ripped
Oh,
from a CD. And I think there's a
yeah.
remastered version that might have a better bass.
Yeah, we should mention that. I'm reviewing the remastered version.
Is there more
Sounds
bass on
great.
that? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Because I listen to this through my speakers at my desk, and I'm not talking about my laptop. I have like real speakers at my desk.
Yeah,
I listen
yeah,
to it
me
with
too.
headphones, and I listen to it in the car, and I never had a good bass sound in any
Yeah,
of those three listenings.
it's a on the remastered. I could tell the bass tone is it's got some high end to it. Um, it's got a little distortion on the high end. I can imagine if that in a non-remastered version, it could get lost pretty easily.
Gotcha.
Makes sense.
Andrew, is there anything that doesn't work for you on this record?
I'm kind of in the same vein as what you guys are kind of saying, where I think the last track in the Stage Whisper is just kind of head scratching. And I don't know what they were, excuse me, I don't know what they were going for, but it kind of does feel like it's paired with Like a Fool on track one, which to me, I like a Fool, and I'm fine with it opening. But if we were to lop off in a Stage Whisper and put Like a Fool at a different spot, I don't think that would be problematic. But yeah, in a Stage Whisper, it seems like maybe they're trying to open and close the record with the more kind of dissonant sounds that they're branching off into. Um, and some friends that who've listened, I know that Mac's voice can be a bit of a barrier. And to me, I'll just kind of repeat what you said. It seems like those 2010s records, vocals up front, like it's a not pop rock, but a traditional
Mm-hmm.
record. And there's times where it is a little bit lost here. So um, I hear what you're saying. But I mean, not a whole lot to complain about, from my standpoint.
Right.
Like I said, and I guess I'll say Stretched Out. Sometimes track 11 is that's where sometimes the vocals will get me a little bit. Like that's one, but no, I like his vocals on most everything here. But I hear yeah, sometimes it gets lost.
Yeah. I think part of the charm is that with it's not a lo-fi record per se, but with an indie rock record, imperfection is part of the deal. Like the bass isn't going to be exactly the right volume. It might be a little thin. The vocals aren't going to be as polished as a pop record or a big studio record. So you kind of like, it's like listening to like an early Sebadoh or some of those like late 80s Dinosaur Jr. albums. Like you got to know that there's going to be some stuff it doesn't sound like it was recorded at Electric Ladyland over a year and a half. Like it's much more of the moment. It's a little loose and ragged at times, but that's what the charm is. So, and I understand like in the comments why so many people were like, this is a perfect indie rock album, because that totally checks out with me. But I do want to ask, so it's weird. Superchunk, obviously a successful indie rock band, and obviously they're continued it into the 2000s. Never really a radio band or an MTV band. I know they had a video for a later record that was like, it was probably 120 minutes that played it. It had Janine Garofalo was in it, and David Cross were in it for a record or for a single, but they're not really a band that's ever made a dent that I can think of. And I don't really hear a song on here in 1994 that's going to get onto MTV or into like mainstream radio. Like it's still just too indie rock for that. But yet they managed to like maintain a band, even though they were never really quote unquote successful in the mainstream sense, which is unusual. I mean, not a lot of bands that were indie rock bands of this level are still around or even made it out of the 90s. Like they just kind of petered out. But
So is this the story of Merge Records subsidizing the band?
I actually have a book about Merge Records. It's a lot of photography, but it's also like the history of the label. And I would say, yeah, like when you're running a label and you get to put out the record You know, you don't have to worry about, and you could do it when you have time. Like you're not on a schedule essentially, and you're not worried about like, oh, we'll get it out when we get it out, sort of thing. And I think that's kind of the approach they've taken in the 2000s, but it also then allows them to take more time to get the sound, and that's why we've heard a little bit more polished sound, because they're not so focused on themselves and they're able to relax a little bit. So, but what my point was, like, in terms of output, I mean, they put out like 6 albums in the 90s, and in longevity, like, this is a very unusual band that they've been around for this long. There's just not, they don't have a lot of peers left from this era.
Yeah, I can think of like other indie bands. Some of them, though, that like have maintained careers pretty consistently. If you say like, let's just take Dinosaur Jr. for example, they did have a hit, or at least an MTV single for a minute. You know, that was more the anomaly. And it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with why they're making records now. But and I think in the same way you can make the case for them, it's a little unusual they didn't like pop through with at least a single like that,
Right.
Maybe because the label they were on, I don't know, but it would seem very logical that that could have happened for them. That some, the music's accessible not enough, there was enough material. You would think that something could have popped in the 90s to at least have a moment on radio or MTV.
I think that if Digging for Something had been a single in the 90s, they could have had a moment. Like, to me, Digging for Something is one of their best singles, and it's so catchy and so well done.
Yeah.
It's the perfect length. It's 3 minutes 30 seconds. Like, that could have been a big single in the 90s, but it came out 2010. It was yeah, it was 10 years.
Yeah.
It was honestly, it's like 15 years too late. But that was probably the one that was gonna do it for them. But we can't change their trajectory of album releases and songwriting, but we can vote on this record like our patrons did. So I'll release the poll results just in a moment, but Jay, where do you land on this record? Is it a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single?
Yeah, I think I showed my hand here. I'm landing at a worthy album. The like I said, the bookends are head scratcher. There's slightly rough vocals here and there, but it's in no way a deal breaker. It almost adds to the charm, I think, of the feel of the record. So yeah, it's a worthy album for me. Not perfect, but very, very good. Where are you at?
I am also at a worthy album. My changes would be, I dump In a Stage Whisper. I'd move saving my ticket to number 1, the first part number 2, and then make Like a Fool the third. That's your cool down track right there. You open, you got some energy. Second track, again, you're rocking, cool down, and then you get back up with Water Wings. Like, that to me is the start of the record right there. Mac, call me when you do your remix record, if you want me to handle a remix or not a remix, but a reordering of the record, the Tim's version. That's what I'll do. I'll just start releasing, instead of Taylor's version of albums, we're getting Tim's version, which I just changed the track listing so it's a little better. But Andrew, share with us.
Yeah. I was very excited to bring this forward. This is definitely a worthy album to me. Yeah, I think the first 10 are just bangers, and I like the 11th track too. So it's funny we all agreed on In a Stage Whisper, but no, I think you said it well, where like it's not a lo-fi record, but you really experience all the DIY of not just recording, but you kind of feel like, oh, it's DIY, and it just puts me back into the mind space of when I used to be in a band and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, worthy for me all the way.
It sounds to me, this is gonna be a weird way to put it, but it feels like I'm capable of doing this. Like, I probably can't come up with the melodies the way that they do. But like when I hear that guitar playing, when I hear that bass playing, not the drumming because I can't play drums, but when I hear that, I go, oh yeah, like these are riffs that I can understand. Like I can't understand when I'm listening to like certain bands, like they're so complex, or they're, it's when I hear a band like this, like I feel like I can pick up my guitar, plug it into an amp, and like rock out the same way. And it's something I'm capable of doing, as opposed to something that's overly polished where I'm like, I'm never going to get that tone. Like that tone doesn't exist for me, or that riff is way too hard. So like this sounds human to me in a lot of ways.
I think
So there
that
you
said
go.
well.
Thank you for bringing. I'm glad we got to revisit Superchunk. It's rare air when we get to revisit the same band, but this has been so long. It's almost like talking about them for the first time. Because let's be it, we didn't know what we were doing. Even by episode 84, we were still like half-assing it, not half-assing it. We were just like confused and like, are we still going to do this? It's the end. It's almost year two or end of year two. Are we going to keep going? Like, yeah, I guess we'll keep going.
I'd like
14
to
years
think
later,
we're continuing to refine and get better every episode. So.
right? And maybe we'll get to the Smashing Pumpkins someday. I heard they were important in the 90s. I don't know, because they haven't come up yet. If they haven't come up yet, how important could they really be?
True.
Even though
I don't think
that was
I don't think anybody suggested them.
No, nobody's ever seen. That's why I'm
I
saying
think
like
we've had over 1,000 albums in the hopper, and I don't think they've been suggested. And
so
I'm being
people
totally
must
serious.
not really think that they were actually that important.
You can guarantee somebody's going to put one in now.
My favorite Smashing Pumpkins album from the 90s might be the B-Sides collection, Pisces Iscariot. That's the weirdest thing probably besides a door, but I really do love that B-Sides collection. Like that was probably the second thing I got, because I probably got Siamese Dream first and then I got that. And that might be the only band ever where I like the B-Sides collection as my favorite release, if I'm being honest. Although Catherine Wheel has a great B-Sides collection. Andrew, thank you so much, as I said, for bringing this record to us and letting us revisit Superchunk with you. If nobody suggests Smashing Pumpkins, you could do it next year. I'm just saying, just let you know if you want to.
Would that be the first time somebody selects a B-Sides record?
I mean, we don't have to do that one. We could do Gish. We could do.
I don't believe anybody has done a B-Sides.
Any of the big ones.
No, we don't want. Yeah, so it'd be the Gish or a door or Pisces Iscariot. That would be fine with me. I would be happy to revisit that. But yeah, I don't think there weren't a ton of bands that actually put out an entire album of just the B-sides and rare tracks. So because that does not, there's no like remixes of anything. There's no album tracks on that thing. And even the Catherine Wheel one has like a shortened version of Heal, like, and it does have album stuff on there. So that might be a whole thing to actually do a B-sides record of all unique material. Oasis is probably the other one.
Master Plan.
Yeah, that one I think is just all B-sides. But Jay, get the intern Steve on this. Tell him we need to find how many B-sides albums there were in the 90s. I want that by the end of the hour. EOD or end of it. EOH. End of hour. Circle back on that. We need to synergize. Anyway, I need to get us out of here with letting you know you can go to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com to join the union. You get to vote in the polls. By the way, 90% were the album at Patreon.
Whoa.
Better EP, 10%. There were 10 votes. So if you do the math, one person voted for Better EP and 9 people voted for Worthy Album. And based on the comments, we can deduce who voted EP, and that was Ian. So true to his word, EP. But I just unmasked him as a voter, I think, right there. That might be a violation of his voting rights. I might have done something that's going to get me in trouble. But yeah, you can vote in the polls like this, and our monthly album tournaments that you can suggest the albums at digmeoutpodcast.com. Also, when you join the union, you get to access to our Discord, which has been lively with discussions recently, including talking about Apple storage. I mean, that was a big topic if you're really excited about online storage and the cloud.
Well, that was in the spirit of trying to share out of distribution music.
Yes.
It was about music, but yes.
But everything gets derailed into tangents and yeah. So also you can read the Box newsletter at Patreon. The Box newsletter is our Substack newsletter that goes out almost every day with new releases of 80s, 90s, and aughts music, books, etc., as well as history of the bands. We have multiple podcasts going. We've got obviously this. Then we have our bonus aughts episodes, which I believe, Jay, if you subscribe at Substack, you get those. Is that right? Or
And Patreon.
And Patreon. So both places, though. That's what I'm saying.
For the aughts episodes?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're on Substack or Patreon, you'll get those.
There you go. And we've already recorded 2 more. We've got 1 out. There's 2 more coming. Also, you can get our 80s metal episodes there as well. Just launched this year, 80s metal. We've covered so many bands so far, over half a dozen. Like we've done like 7 or 8 episodes now. And we just launched. It's crazy. It feels like we launched this like 2 weeks ago, and we've already done like 7 episodes.
I know. They're stacking up.
They are.
It's nice. It was kind of weird to go to the page, and then we only had 1 episode. It just felt weird.
It did.
It had been so long since that time with the 90s episode. So it's nice to have it filled out with a half dozen or so.
I don't know that I can do 712 metal episodes. That might be, we might need to like consider a limit. Like we'll do 100 episodes or something, because that would take us into my 70s, and I'm not joking. Sorry, my 60s. That would take me to my mid 60s if we did that many episodes.
Okay. Keep you young.
I would really like to retire at some point.
Have you seen how good Halford looks now? It's all that metal.
He's gnawing on metal every day, getting that iron. There you go. Lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.